The Hartwell Regional Medical Center had been standing since 1952, and in 73 years, it had survived budget crises, a tornado that took out half the East Wing, and 3 different accreditation reviews. What it had never survived, until that spring, was a man like Director Decard Moss. Moss had arrived in February with a leather portfolio and a firm handshake, and a PowerPoint presentation that used the phrase operational efficiency 47 times. The board had hired him straight from a logistics firm in Phoenix. Not a hospital administrator. Not a healthcare professional of any kind. A logistics man. The kind who looked at a supply chain and saw numbers to compress. He had walked the floors of Hartwell Regional on his first day the way a buyer walks through a house he's already decided to flip. Nobody on staff had been fooled. But nobody had said a word either, because Decard Moss had arrived with board approval and a mandate to right-size the organization. And in a county where the nearest competing hospital was 40 miles east. The staff of Hartwell Regional had learned a long time ago that you did not bite the hand that signed your paycheck, even when that hand was closing around your throat. The cuts started in March. First, it was the overnight housekeeping crew, reduced from 4 to 2. Then the dietary staff lost a shift supervisor. Then the equipment maintenance schedule was stretched from quarterly to semi-annual. A memo went out in the second week of March, printed on Moss's new letterhead, which someone had quietly noted cost 3 times what the old letterhead had, informing all department heads that non-essential supply requisitions would now require director-level approval. A second memo followed the next day clarifying that the director's office hours for approvals were Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 to noon. The staff read these memos and said nothing. They pinned them to the corkboards in break rooms and hallways and stared at them the way you stare at something that hasn't hurt you yet, but you know eventually will. In the middle of all of this, somewhere between the first memo and the second, a new nurse checked in at HR and was assigned to the medical surgical floor. Her name was Fay Drummond. She was 31 years old. She had dark hair she kept pulled back in a low bun, and she had a way of standing very still in doorways that made people think she was waiting to be noticed. She rarely was. The charge nurse on the floor, a woman named Patty, who had worked at Hartwell for 16 years, handed Fay her badge and her locker assignment and a quick rundown of the floor layout and moved on to the next thing. That was how Fay arrived, not with a splash, with a quiet step through a side door and a name badge clipped to her scrub pocket. Her file said she had a nursing degree from the University of Tennessee and 2 years of experience at a community hospital in rural Kentucky. It said she had no disciplinary record, no certifications beyond her RN, no advanced training of any visible note. It was, by every measurable standard, the most unremarkable nursing file Patty had ever processed. What the file did not say, what no file in that building said, because it was not the kind of thing that goes into a nursing file, was that before Fay Drummond had ever set foot in a nursing program, she had spent 6 years as a combat medic with the United States Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. She had done things in the back of a Humvee with a field kit and bad lighting that most attending physicians in that building could not have done in a fully equipped OR. She had stabilized a sergeant with a sucking chest wound, using material she found in his jacket pocket. She had delivered a baby in a forward operating base outside Kandahar, because there was nobody else, and the baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. She had left the Army at 27, quietly and without fanfare, the same way she did most things, and had gone to nursing school because the idea of being a doctor had never interested her. Doctors gave orders. Nurses were in the room. Fay had always wanted to be in the room. She showed up to her first shift at Hartwell Regional at 6:50 in the morning, 10 minutes before she was required to, and she started learning the floor. The trouble with Decard Moss, beyond the obvious, was that he genuinely believed he was helping. That was the thing that made him dangerous. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't cruel in the way of people who enjoy cruelty. He was the particular kind of dangerous that comes from a man who has mastered one discipline and cannot imagine why that discipline would not apply everywhere. He had looked at Hartwell Regional and seen waste. He had seen overtime costs and supply redundancies and what he called staffing inefficiencies. He had run the numbers the way he'd been trained to run them, and the numbers had told him what to do, and he had done it. He did not ask the nurses what happened when a patient coded at 2 in the morning, and there were only 2 housekeepers on the floor instead of 4. He did not ask the maintenance team what the practical consequence was of letting equipment go unchecked for 6 months instead of 3. He did not ask anyone because, in his experience, the experience of a man who had spent his career optimizing warehouse throughput and freight logistics, the people doing the work were not the people who understood the system. He was the person who understood the system. That was why he had been hired. His office on the 3rd floor had a leather chair that Fay had clocked on her 3rd day as the kind that cost upward of $2,000. The carpet was new. There was a small bar cart in the corner with a crystal decanter that held, as far as anyone could tell, nothing but the suggestion of scotch. The break room on the 2nd floor, where the nursing staff spent the few minutes they had between patients, had a coffee maker with a cracked carafe held together with a rubber band, and 2 chairs whose cushions had compressed to the density of cardboard sometime during the Obama administration. The staff talked about the chair. They talked about it in the way people talk about things they cannot change, but need to name. Fay listened. She didn't say much in those early weeks. She watched. She learned where the supply closets were, and which drawers in the medication room stuck, and which call light on room 214 had a 2-second delay before it registered. She learned that the Meridian IV pumps on the floor, the ones that had been in service for 6 years, had started throwing error codes that the maintenance log noted as resolved, but that the nursing staff privately referred to as the glitch. She asked one of the other nurses, a young man named Travis, about it on her 2nd week. "The pumps freeze up sometimes," Travis said, lowering his voice the way people did when they talked about anything that might get back to Moss. "The screen locks and you have to do a manual restart. Maintenance says it's a software thing. They were supposed to update the firmware, but it got pushed back. How long ago was it supposed to happen?" Travis looked at the ceiling. 4 months ago, maybe? 5? It got listed as non-essential. Fay nodded slowly and said nothing more about it. But she started checking the pumps on her patients at the beginning of every shift, manually confirming flow rates the way she had once confirmed vital signs in the back of a vehicle moving at 60 miles an hour over bad road. Not because she'd been told to, because she had spent enough time in enough rooms to know that the thing nobody was watching was always the thing that went wrong. It was a Tuesday in April when it happened. The morning had been busy, 2 admissions before 7, a patient in room 208 with a post-surgical complication that had required 3 people and 40 minutes to manage, and the kind of low-level chaos that a short-staffed floor generates as a matter of course. By 9:30, the floor had settled into something approaching routine, and Fay was charting at the nurse's station when she heard the soft mechanical chime of an IV pump completing its cycle in room 211. She stood and went to check. Room 211 held a patient named Mr. Hargrove, 68 years old, admitted 2 days prior for a cardiac arrhythmia. He was on a continuous infusion of antiarrhythmic medication, a drip that needed to run without interruption to keep his heart in a stable rhythm. The pump was supposed to alarm when the bag ran low. It was supposed to alarm when flow was interrupted. It was supposed to alarm at any deviation from the programmed parameters. The pump in room 2111 was not alarming. Fay stepped to the bedside and looked at the screen. The display showed the infusion as active. The programmed rate appeared normal. The bag appeared to have volume remaining. By every indicator the machine offered, everything was fine. Fay put her fingers on Mr. Hargrove's wrist. His pulse was irregular in a way it had not been yesterday. Not dangerously so. Not yet, but wrong. She could feel it, that offbeat flutter that you learn to recognize not in a classroom, but in the field, in the dark, in the places where machines are scarce and your hands are the most reliable instrument available. She traced the IV line from the pump to the catheter in his arm. The tubing felt right. The insertion site looked clean. She pressed the manual flow indicator on the pump, a small lever that should have shown resistance if fluid was moving, and felt nothing. No resistance, no movement. The pump said it was running. The pump was not running. She hit the nurse call panel on the wall and spoke without raising her voice, the calm, flat tone she had learned to use in situations where panic was an option she could not afford. "I need Travis in 211. Now." Then she went around to the other side of the bed and pulled the pump from the wall mount and did a hard restart, watching the display cycle through its reboot sequence. When it came back up, she ran the self-diagnostic manually, something the manufacturer's guide listed as a quarterly procedure, but which took 40 seconds, and which she had memorized from the manual she'd read in the break room during her first week, the one that had been sitting under a stack of outdated policy binders for what appeared to be several years. The diagnostic flagged an internal flow sensor error. The pump had lost the ability to detect whether fluid was actually moving through the line. It had been delivering nothing to Mr. Hargrove for what the error log, when she pulled it up, showed had been approximately 2 hours and 17 minutes. Travis came through the door. Fay handed him the pump display without a word and said, "Get Dr. Kenner. I'm switching him to a manual drip until we have a confirmed working pump. Does Patty know? Get Dr. Kenner first." Travis went. Fay stayed. She had the backup drip running and the rate set, and Mr. Hargrove's vitals charted before the physician arrived. When Dr. Kenner, a small, quick cardiologist who had been at Hartwell for 20 years, came through the door and assessed the situation, he looked at the chart Fay handed him and then looked at her. "When did you catch this?" 9:34, she said. "I came in to check the cycle chime." He was quiet for a moment. The pump didn't alarm. No. He looked at the error log she'd already printed. He looked at it for a long time. "This has been flagged before." "The maintenance log shows 4 prior entries," Fay said, "all marked resolved. The firmware update that was supposed to address the sensor calibration issue was deferred in January." Dr. Kenner folded the printout and put it in his coat pocket. He did not say anything else to Fay. He said everything he needed to say to her with one look that lasted about 3 seconds, the kind of look that passes between people who have been in the same room with the same kind of near miss and know exactly what they're both thinking. Then he went to go find Decard Moss. Fay heard about that conversation secondhand, the way she heard about most things, from Travis, who had heard it from the unit clerk, who had apparently been within earshot when Dr. Kenner walked into Moss's office without knocking and closed the door. What she heard was that Dr. Kenner had placed the printed error log on Moss's desk and explained, in terms that became progressively less clinical as the conversation continued, that a patient had gone 2 hours without cardiac medication because a pump with a documented sensor failure had been allowed to remain in service due to a deferred maintenance order. That the firmware update which would have prevented the error had been classified as non-essential. That the nurse who had caught it had done so not because of any system alert, but because she hadn't manually checked the pump based on her own training and judgment. She heard that Moss had said something about liability protocols and incident reporting chains. She heard that Dr. Kenner had told him what he could do with his incident reporting chain. She heard that the meeting had lasted 11 minutes. The next morning, 3 things happened. The maintenance team received an emergency work order to physically remove all 6 Meridian pumps from the medical surgical floor and replace them with the newer Sentinel units that had been sitting in the supply warehouse, still in their packaging since October, waiting for a requisition approval that had never come through. A letter went to the board of directors, and an investigator from the state health department called Hartwell Regional to schedule what she described, in the careful language of bureaucrats who have been told something alarming, as a routine compliance review. Moss did not come to the floor that day. He did not come to the floor the next day either. Fay heard about the investigation the same way she heard about everything else. A morning, 2 weeks later, when she arrived to find 2 people in business clothes, sitting in the conference room off the main train corridor with a stack of files and a voice recorder on the table, Patty pulled her aside before shift start. "State investigators," she said quietly. "They've been here since 7. They want to talk to the staff." Fay nodded and clipped her badge to her pocket and went to start her morning assessments. She was in room 207 when one of the investigators, a woman named Agent Calloway, from the state's Health Facility Oversight Division, knocked on the open door and asked if she could speak with Fay when she had a moment. "I have a moment now," Fay said, finishing her documentation and stepping into the hall. They went to the small consultation room near the elevator bank. Agent Calloway set a notepad on the table and looked at Fay with the specific kind of careful neutrality that investigators use when they want you to fill the silence. Fay did not fill the silence. "You were the nurse who identified the pump failure in room 211, Calloway said finally. "Yes. Can you walk me through what prompted you to check manually?" Fay considered the question. It was, she knew, the heart of everything. The thing that separated this incident from the category of incidents that never get found until someone is already in the ICU or already gone. "The pump chimed for a cycle completion," she said. "I came in to verify. When I assessed the patient, his pulse felt inconsistent with what it had been at my last check. I traced the line and ran the manual flow indicator. There was no resistance. The pump display showed active delivery. It did. And you knew to run the manual diagnostic from the manufacturer's service guide," Fay said. "It was in the break room. I read it during my first week. Calloway wrote something most nurses wouldn't have." She stopped herself. "That's outside standard floor protocol." "Yes." Another silence. "Ms. Drummond, your personnel file lists 2 years at a community hospital in Kentucky before coming here. Is that the entirety of your clinical background?" Fay looked at her. "No." She said it simply, the way she said most things. Calloway waited. "I spent 6 years as a combat medic before nursing school. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. A lot of that time involved managing equipment failure in environments where failure proper wasn't an option." Calloway set her pen down. She looked at Fay for a long moment in the way people look at someone they have significantly underestimated. "That's not in your file. It's not the kind of thing that comes up," Fay said. "I'm a nurse, that's what I do now." The compliance review took 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Decard Moss came to the floor twice. The first time he walked the hall with a kind of careful deliberateness, the way a man walks when he is aware that people are watching and wants to appear as though he does not know they are watching. The second time, he stopped at the nurse's station and said something to Patty about team resilience that Patty received with the expression of a woman who has heard every possible variation of that phrase and finds all of them equally hollow. Nobody on the floor said anything to Moss directly. Nobody needed to. The business clothes people were still in the building. The file had been pulled. The pumps were gone. The story had already moved past the point where anything Moss said to the staff could alter it. The review findings came out on a Thursday. Fay was coming off a 12-hour shift when Patty caught her at the elevator. "You here?" "Not yet." Patty had a printout in her hand. She held it without offering it, as though she was still deciding whether the information inside it was satisfying enough to share. 11 citations, she said. 3 immediate jeopardy findings. Equipment maintenance, staffing adequacy, and administrative credentialing. Fay pressed the elevator button. Credentialing? Moss doesn't hold a healthcare administrator certification. The board hired him without one. Patty finally extended the printout. Apparently, that's required for a facility receiving Medicare and Medicaid funding. Fay took the paper and looked at it. She scanned the summary section, the careful regulatory language that translated, in plain terms, to, "This facility nearly killed someone because a man who did not understand what hospitals do was put in charge of how a hospital operates." "What happens now?" she asked. "The board put him on administrative leave this morning, pending review." Patty took the paper back. "There's also talk of a financial audit. Apparently, the savings he generated over the past 3 months are about a tenth of what the potential malpractice liability would have been if Mr. Hargrove had coded." Fay nodded slowly. "There's something else," Patty said. She had the look of someone delivering news she found personally significant. "Dr. Kenner submitted a formal recommendation to the board that you be considered for a senior clinical quality role, some kind of patient safety coordinator position they apparently want to create." The elevator arrived. Fay stepped in and turned to face the hallway. "What did you say to that?" Patty asked. "I haven't said anything yet." "What are you going to say?" Fay thought about the question for a moment. She thought about the room she had come from. Room 207, where a 72-year-old woman named Mrs. Beckett had been recovering from a hip replacement and had that morning taken her first unassisted steps to the window. She thought about the 12 hours of that shift and what they had contained, the texture of them, the specific weight of being useful, in a way that was immediate and physical and real. "I'm going to say no," she said. Patty looked at her. "You'd be good at it." "Maybe," Fay said. "But I'm better at this." The elevator doors closed. Decard Moss resigned 4 days later. He issued a statement through the hospital's PR contact that described his departure as a mutual decision and thanked the board for the opportunity to serve. The statement did not mention the 11 citations. It did not mention the financial audit, which was still ongoing. It did not mention room 2111 or Mr. Hargrove or a pump that had run silent while a man's heart waited for medication that wasn't coming. The board appointed an interim director from within the existing administrative staff, a woman named Sandra Elroy, who had been the director of nursing services for 9 years, and who, on her first day in the role, walked the floors and stopped at the break room on the second floor and looked at the cough maker with the cracked carafe held together with a rubber band. The next morning, there was a new cough maker on the counter. Nobody made an announcement about it. It was just there. Fay saw it on her way in at 6:50, 10 minutes before her shift. She poured a cup and stood at the window for a moment before the day started. Outside, the parking lot was still half empty, the early April light thin and pale across the asphalt. Somewhere in the building, a patient was waking up. Somewhere a monitor was tracking a heartbeat. Somewhere a pump was running and someone, she hoped, was checking to make sure it actually was. She finished the coffee. She clipped her badge to her pocket. She went to work.